You have $800,000 sitting in your RRSP. You are pulling a steady 4% from dividends, and you have told yourself you will never have to sell a single share. It sounds solid on paper. Run the same plan out to age 85, though, and there is a real chance it leaves you with nothing left to draw on. That is not a scare tactic. It is what happens when two things collide that most retirees never sit down and compare. What your dividends actually pay you, and what the government eventually requires you to withdraw whether you want to or not. The gap between those two numbers, the one between the income you choose and the income you are forced to take, is the first lie quietly working against a lot of good retirement plans. I have sat across from people who did everything right. They saved for decades. They read the right books. They built a plan that made complete sense on paper, and still, somewhere around year 12 or 15 of retirement, the math stopped cooperating, and nobody had warned them it would. This is not the only lie sitting inside a typical Canadian retirement plan today. There are 4 of them, and the ones that sound the most reasonable are usually the most dangerous, because nobody thinks to question them. We are starting with the one that gets repeated with the most confidence, the idea that a famous withdrawal rule from the 1990s no longer applies to you. If you are between 55 and 65 here in Canada, trying to work out how much you can actually spend without running dry, subscribe before we go any further. The math in this video is the kind that saves people from a mistake that does not show up until it is 10 years too late to fix. Here is the first lie, and it is the one repeated with the most confidence at dinner tables and in online comment sections alike. People say the 4% rule is dead, some outdated formula from the 1990s that has no business guiding a retirement plan today. The problem is that most people saying it have never actually looked at where the number came from or what it says for a Canadian retiree specifically. Back in 1994, a financial planner named Bill Bengen studied the worst 30-year retirement period in United States history and found that a retiree could safely withdraw 4.15% of their portfolio in year 1, then adjust that amount for inflation every year after without running out of money. In 2022, Bengen revisited that research using Canadian stock and bond returns, testing it against the worst year a Canadian retiree could have started, 1968. The number that came back was not lower. It was higher, 4.7%. That means a retiree with $800,000 was not limited to $32,000 a year. In the worst case Canada has actually produced, they could safely draw $37,600. The rule was never dead. It was conservative, and conservative is not the same thing as wrong. Run that math against a real household, and the rule stops sounding like a warning and starts sounding like permission. At 4.7%, an $800,000 portfolio supports $37,600 a year before a single dividend is even counted separately. That is not a ceiling telling someone to spend more than feels comfortable. It is a floor showing how much room actually exists. Room a lot of retirees leave unused because a rule with an outdated reputation feels scarier than the number sitting behind it. Meet Mark and Diane, both 63 with $800,000 across their RRSPs, $200,000 in TFSAs, a home worth $650,000, and a $150,000 mortgage at 2.9%. Somewhere along the way, someone told them the 4% rule was outdated nonsense, so they stopped using any rule at all and decided to just live off whatever their dividends happened to pay that year, currently around 4.5%. Here is the part that should give you pause. Throwing out a conservative guideline does not automatically make your plan safer. It just means you have removed the one thing that was keeping a floor under your spending decisions. That is the trade-off nobody names out loud, comfort now, in exchange for a plan with no bottom. This is not about attacking what Mark and Diane decided. It is about showing you a variable neither of them had considered, because dividends and withdrawal rules are not actually measuring the same thing. And that brings us to the second lie, the one that sounds even safer than the first, right up until the year it is not. The second lie is the one that sounds the safest of all four, which is exactly why it does the most damage. It goes like this. If your dividends cover your spending, you never have to sell a single share, and your principal stays untouched forever. I used to believe that too. I built spreadsheets years ago showing income streams that never dipped into the account balance, and on paper it looked like the perfect machine. It was not until I sat down and ran the sequence of returns against it that I saw where the whole idea falls apart. Dividends are not guaranteed. Companies cut them in bad years, and they do not automatically climb to keep pace with inflation the way a paycheck might. But the bigger problem, the one almost nobody accounts for, is that the government does not care what your dividend yield happens to be. Once you turn 71 and convert your RRSP into a RRIF, the CRA requires you to withdraw a minimum percentage of that account every single year, whether the market is up, down, or sideways. At age 71, that minimum sits at 5.28% of the account's value from the previous year. On an $800,000 RRSP, that works out to a required withdrawal of $42,240. If Mark and Diane's dividend yield is paying them 4.5%, that is $36,000. The gap, just over $6,000, has to come from somewhere, and the only place it can come from is selling shares. That would not be a disaster if markets only ever went up. They do not. Picture a 15% drop in the second year of retirement. Mark and Diane still owe the CRA that same minimum withdrawal, calculated off last year's higher balance, and now they are selling shares at a loss to cover a bill that has nothing to do with how their investments are actually performing that year. Every share sold at a depressed price is a share that never gets the chance to recover. That is sequence of returns risk, and it sits underneath the dividend-only plan as an invisible cost, the cost of being forced to sell low in exactly the years you can least afford to. Here is the part worth sitting with for a moment. The danger was never dividends themselves. Dividends are a real and useful piece of a retirement income plan. The danger is treating them as the entire plan, as if the RRIF minimum withdrawal rules simply would not apply to you because your yield happened to be higher than average 1 year. The rules do not check your yield before sending the bill. This is the piece most retirement conversations skip entirely, because dividend income sounds so stable that people stop asking what happens when a mandatory withdrawal is bigger than what the dividends actually pay. It is not a rare edge case. It is built into the structure of every RRIF in the country, and it grows every year you age, climbing well past 6% by your mid-70s and higher still after that. So the fix is not abandoning dividend-paying investments. It is understanding that principal was always going to be touched eventually, by law, and building a plan around that fact instead of pretending it will not happen. Once you accept that dividends alone do not cover what the CRA requires, the next decision most retirees face is what to do with debt still sitting on the books. And that is where the third lie takes hold, the one about mortgages. The third lie sounds like common sense, maybe the most common sense of all four. Pay off the mortgage, retire debt-free, sleep better at night. For a lot of people, that is genuinely the right call. The lie is in the word always, because using RRSP money to erase a low-interest mortgage can quietly cost more than the debt itself. Here is why. Every dollar pulled out of an RRSP or RRIF gets added to your taxable income for that year. Mark and Diane are looking at their $150,000 mortgage, sitting at 2.9%, which costs them about $4,350 a year in interest. To wipe it out in one lump sum, they would need to withdraw $150,000 from savings. At a marginal tax rate of 30%, that withdrawal creates a tax bill of $45,000. So paying off a $150,000 debt actually requires pulling $195,000 out of the RRSP once the CRA takes its share. That $45,000 in tax is not just gone for 1 year. It is money that would have kept compounding inside the account. Left invested and growing at a modest 5% for 20 years, that same $45,000 would have grown to somewhere around $120,000. That is the real trade-off. Debt-free today in exchange for $120,000 less in the portfolio down the road. Nobody writes that number down when they say pay off the mortgage and never look back. I once worked with a client who did exactly this at 62, cleared the mortgage in one move, and felt fantastic about it for about 2 years. Then the roof needed replacing, a $30,000 job that could not wait. With no mortgage and most of their liquidity tied up, they had to sell investments to cover it, and the market happened to be down 25% that month. They locked in a real loss to pay for a repair that a rainy day fund or that same $150,000 mortgage's worth of liquidity would have covered without touching a single share. That is the fragile path, debt-free but thin on liquidity, forced to sell into a downturn the moment something unexpected shows up, and something unexpected always shows up eventually. The steadier path keeps a low-interest mortgage in place, lets the RRSP keep compounding, and covers the monthly payment out of ordinary cash flow, dividends, part-time income, whatever fits the household. Being debt-free feels good. Feeling good and being financially resilient are not always the same thing, and a 2.9% mortgage is rarely the debt worth losing sleep over. Ask yourself which one actually helps you sleep better, a paid-off house with no cushion left, or a small manageable payment sitting next to a portfolio that still has room to breathe. None of this means never pay off a mortgage. It means running the actual math before treating debt-free as a goal that overrides every other consideration. And once that decision is settled, the last lie is the one that keeps people from spending money they spent 40 years earning in the first place. The fourth lie is quieter than the other three, and it does not show up in a spreadsheet. It sounds like this: you will naturally spend less as you get older, so it is fine to live tight in your 60s and let loose later if there is anything left over. There is some truth buried in there. Spending on travel and activity tends to slow in what people call the go-go, slow-go, and no-go years of retirement. The mistake is using that pattern as permission to underspend right now, in the years you are healthiest and most able to actually enjoy the money. It makes complete sense why this happens. You spent 40 years building this account. Tearing it down on purpose feels wrong, even backwards, even after decades of being told to save more. That instinct is not a character flaw. It is saver's guilt showing up right at the point where it stops being useful. I will be honest, I have been guilty of this myself. In our own early retirement years, I could not bring myself to spend past 3%, even though every projection said we had far more room than that. It took building out a spreadsheet of regret scenarios, the version of the future where we played it too safe and simply never used the money, before that changed anything. One number is worth sitting with. Research from Morningstar has found that retirees who follow an actual spending plan, rather than obsessing over a single withdrawal percentage, report higher satisfaction and still have their portfolios intact 10 years in. The plan matters more than the number. Most retirees, statistically, end up leaving more behind than they expected to, not less. A simple fix is setting aside a fund bucket early, something like 5% of the portfolio each year for the first 10 years of retirement, earmarked specifically for travel or time with family, no guilt attached. That is not reckless spending. It matches what the data already shows, that most retirees are more likely to underspend and regret it than to overspend and run short. You will probably slow down eventually. Most people do. What matters more is whether you wait for that to happen before letting yourself enjoy any of it. 4 lies down. What ties all of them together is not a single perfect number. It is a framework flexible enough to hold up against all 4 at once. 4 lies, and every one of them sounded reasonable enough that smart, careful people believed them anyway. The 4% rule was never dead. It was a conservative starting point built from the worst years Canadian markets have produced, not a ceiling you have to stay under. Dividends alone were never the full plan either. Not once RRIF minimum withdrawals start pulling more out of the account than your yield actually covers. A low-interest mortgage is not automatically the enemy. Not when clearing it early can cost more in lost growth than the debt itself charges in interest. And slowing down later in retirement is not a reason to shortchange yourself now. In the years you are best able to enjoy what you built, put those 4 pieces together and a simple shape emerges. Think of retirement income as a 3-legged stool. One leg is the guaranteed floor, CPP, OAS, and any workplace pension coming in no matter what markets do. The second leg is a flexible withdrawal bucket, your RRSP and TFSA working together, adjusted year to year based on what is actually happening rather than a number picked once and never revisited. The third leg is a contingency bucket, cash set aside specifically for the roof, or the year the market has a bad quarter right when you need money. None of this requires predicting the future perfectly. It requires building a plan sturdy enough that no single wrong guess knocks the whole thing over. Mark and Diane are not doing anything wrong by asking these questions. Neither are you. The lies in this video spread because each one sounds like good sense on its own. It is only once you put real numbers next to them that the cracks show up. And by then it is often years into retirement, which is exactly why it is worth checking the math now instead of waiting. You spent decades earning this money, working through the years that were hard along with the years that were easy. The biggest lie of the 4 might be the quiet idea that you are not allowed to enjoy any of it.